There's a small town nestled in the heart of the woods, a place where everyone knows each other, and secrets are rarely kept. But there was one secret, one dark story that the townsfolk preferred to forget. It was the story of the old house at the end of Maple Street, the house with the attic window that never seemed to stay closed. It was a chilly autumn evening when David, a young photographer, moved into that house. He had no knowledge of its grim past, only seeing it as a charming, albeit slightly run-down, piece of history. The realtor had been eager to sell, practically pushing the keys into his hands. David was drawn to the house's eerie beauty, the creaking wooden floors, the ancient fireplace, and the large attic space he planned to turn into a studio. But the attic, with its single dusty window, held an unsettling aura. The window, with its warped wooden frame, would always swing open, no matter how many times David shut it. He chalked it up to the wind, or the house's age, and didn't think much of it at first. That night, after unpacking, David fell into an uneasy sleep. His dreams were filled with whispers, faint but persistent. He woke up several times, each time feeling as if someone was in the room, watching him. But whenever he turned on the light, there was nothing, just the faint sound of the wind outside. Days passed, and the strange occurrences continued. Objects would move on their own, a chair shifted, a book fell from the shelf. The attic door, which he always kept closed, would be found slightly ajar. David tried to ignore it, attributing everything to the old house settling. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. One evening, while working late in his makeshift studio, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps above him, slow and deliberate. His heart raced as he realized the footsteps were coming from the attic. Grabbing a flashlight, he forced himself up the narrow staircase. The door was open, just a crack. As he pushed it wide, the cool air of the attic enveloped him. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing nothing out of the ordinary, until it landed on the window. It was open again. David walked towards it, intending to close it as usual. But this time, as he reached out, he noticed something in the reflection of the glass, a shadow behind him. He spun around, but the attic was empty. The only sound was his own ragged breathing. He shut the window and quickly left the attic, locking the door behind him. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The whispers were louder, more insistent, but he couldn't make out the words. He tried to ignore them, pulling the covers over his head, but they continued until the early hours of the morning. When he finally drifted off, he was plagued by a vivid dream. In it, he was standing in the attic, staring out the open window. But this time, he wasn't alone. A figure stood beside him, a woman, her face pale and eyes hollow. She reached out to him, her fingers cold as ice, and whispered something that chilled him to the bone. "Help me." David awoke with a start, drenched in sweat. The dream felt so real, the woman's plea still echoing in his ears. He knew he had to find out who she was. He spent the next day researching the history of the house, digging through old town records and archives. What he discovered was a tragedy long forgotten. The house had once belonged to a young couple in the 1920s. The wife, Evelyn, had died mysteriously, her body found at the bottom of the attic stairs. The death was ruled an accident, but rumors spread that her husband had pushed her in a fit of rage. Unable to live with the guilt, he had hanged himself in the attic shortly after. The townsfolk whispered that Evelyn's spirit never left, trapped in the place of her death, waiting for someone to help her find peace. David returned home, the weight of the story heavy on his mind. He knew what he had to do. That night, he went up to the attic one last time, his heart pounding. The window was open again, the chill of the night air cutting through the room. He stood in front of it, calling out into the darkness. "Evelyn, if you're here, show yourself." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the temperature in the room dropped, and the shadow appeared in the corner of the attic. Slowly, it took the shape of the woman from his dreams. Her eyes, once hollow, were filled with sorrow. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. David's throat tightened with fear, but he forced himself to speak. "How? How can I help you?" The shadow moved towards the window, pointing outside to the woods. David understood. He had to find something that would set her free. The next morning, David searched the woods near the house. Hours passed, but just as he was about to give up, he stumbled upon an old, rotting chest buried beneath a tree. Inside was a collection of letters, love letters, from Evelyn's husband. But among them was a single note, a confession of his guilt. David brought the letters back to the attic, placing them by the window. As he did, the shadow appeared once more, her face softening as she read the words. The attic grew warmer, the oppressive air lifting. Evelyn's spirit slowly faded, a look of peace replacing her sorrow. The window, for the first time since David had moved in, stayed shut. David left the house soon after, unable to bear staying in the place that had held so much pain. But before he left, he sealed the attic door, hoping that Evelyn had finally found the peace she deserved. To this day, the house at the end of Maple Street stands empty, the attic window forever closed. And the townsfolk, though they still speak of the house in hushed tones, never mention the shadows in the attic again.